Hello and welcome. Today we open a journey together, not into a list of rules or quick fixes, but into something deeper: how to live a year that feels intentional, unhurried, and aligned with what matters most. At its core, the intentional year is about moving away from drifting through time and learning to walk with clarity, peace, and purpose. Before we begin, let me say this. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to BookSnap, and comment below the title of the book you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. Now, imagine standing at the threshold of a new year. The calendar has just flipped, but instead of excitement, there's a familiar heaviness. Maybe it's the weight of unfinished goals from last year, or the noise of expectations pressing in. Most of us enter each January sprinting, armed with resolutions scribbled on paper, determined that this will be the year everything changes. But the truth is, by February, many of those promises are already fraying. We feel rushed, reactive, caught in currents stronger than our own resolve. The Packiams invite us to a different beginning. They ask, what if a new year didn't have to feel like a frantic dash? What if it could be a doorway into something slower, steadier, and more meaningful? They speak of an unrushed beginning, a choice to pause before the sprint, to step back before stepping forward. It's a radical invitation in a culture obsessed with speed. Think of it like tending a garden. A gardener doesn't plant seeds in frozen soil. They prepare, wait, and study the ground before placing anything in it. In the same way, rushing into a year with a list of goals is like scattering seeds on hard earth. An intentional year begins by softening the soil of the soul, by slowing down, reflecting, and noticing what truly matters. For the Packiams, this unrushed beginning isn't about laziness or avoidance. It's about making room for the right kind of start. They tell of their own lives, moments when ambition and busyness crowded out peace. Holly and Glenn admit that even as people of faith, they often felt overwhelmed by the relentless pace of work, parenting, and ministry. The turning point came when they realized they were living by default, not by design. Instead of being carried along by circumstance, they needed to step into rhythm. An unrushed beginning requires courage. It feels countercultural, almost irresponsible to slow down when the world is screaming, "Hurry." Yet slowing down is the first act of reclaiming time. It is saying, I am not a slave to the clock or to everyone else's demands. It is choosing to breathe, to listen, to let space open before rushing to fill it. Picture yourself sitting at a table in early January, not with a planner bursting with tasks, but with a blank page. Instead of writing goals, you ask, what was life giving to me last year? What drained me? Where did I sense peace? Where did I ignore it? This is the posture of the unrushed beginning. Not performance, but presence. There's an image the Packiams return to, that of thresholds. Every year is like walking through a doorway. If you rush across, you miss the sacredness of passage. But if you pause at the threshold, acknowledging where you've been, giving thanks, grieving losses, asking for wisdom, you enter the new space differently. It becomes more than another year. It becomes a canvas for intention. The unrushed beginning is not about perfection. It's not about having the perfect plan or flawless discipline. It's about setting a tone, choosing a way of being. To begin intentionally is to resist the anxious energy of fixing everything at once, and instead cultivate patience for growth to unfold. And maybe that's the hardest lesson. Growth takes time. Just as a seed cannot bloom overnight, so peace and purpose cannot be forced by sheer willpower. They are nurtured in the soil of quiet beginnings. This first step, the decision not to rush, becomes the foundation for the entire year. Without it, rhythms collapse under the weight of urgency. With it, there is breathing room for freedom, for peace, for joy. So as the Packiams invite us into this journey, they whisper, Begin slowly. Let the first days of your year be a time of reflection, prayer, and listening. Do not run to fix everything. Walk gently. Trust that the slower way will take you further. The intentional year begins not with noise, but with quiet. Not with striving, but with stillness. Not with frantic motion, but with the bold, countercultural choice to wait. And in that waiting, a new kind of life begins to take shape, one that is free, peaceful, and filled with purpose. After slowing down to embrace an unrushed beginning, the question becomes, what do we listen for in the silence? The Packiams answer with a simple truth. We listen for the whisper. Life is loud. Emails, notifications, the constant hum of conversations and obligations. Most of us are so immersed in noise that silence feels uncomfortable, even threatening. Yet the heart of an intentional year begins with cultivating the ability to hear what usually gets drowned out. The quiet voice of God, the stirrings of conscience, the subtle movements of desire that point us toward what matters. Imagine standing in a forest at dawn. The air is still, the world hushed. At first you hear nothing. Then slowly, the faintest rustle of leaves, the gentle call of a bird, the crackle of branches underfoot. What was hidden emerges only because you stopped long enough to notice. This is the way of listening for the whisper. The Packiams describe moments when their own hurried lives left them unable to hear anything but demands. In the rush of ministry schedules, household tasks, and endless obligations, they realized they had stopped discerning what God was actually saying to them. They were busy doing good things, but without the grounding of listening, even good things became heavy burdens. To begin an intentional year, they suggest practices of stillness. This doesn't mean retreating to a monastery or escaping responsibilities. It means making space in daily life, a few minutes in the morning before the phone is checked, a pause at the end of the day before collapsing into bed, even a quiet breath between meetings. These small spaces are where whispers break through, but listening is not passive. It requires an attunement, a willingness to quiet the inner storm long enough to receive. The whisper rarely shouts. It doesn't demand attention like a ringing alarm. Instead, it calls softly, patiently, inviting us to lean in. The Packiams remind us that God's guidance often feels less like a command and more like a nudge, a pull toward peace, a gentle stirring in the soul. For many, this feels difficult because silence exposes things we prefer to ignore. In stillness, we notice our anxieties, our disappointments, the unresolved tensions of our lives. Yet the Packiams insist that even these uncomfortable truths are part of the listening. By facing them, we open ourselves to healing and clarity. Think of listening for the whisper as tuning an instrument. At first, the strings are out of alignment, producing harsh notes, but with careful adjustment, the tones become pure. Our souls, too, must be tuned, away from constant distraction and toward quiet awareness. The whisper helps us discern between what is urgent and what is essential. Without listening, we may confuse the two, spending entire years running after things that never mattered. With listening, we begin to sense which invitations align with peace and which lead only to exhaustion. The Packiams share stories of times they ignored the whisper, pushing forward with plans that seemed logical but left them depleted, and they recall moments when listening redirected them toward life-giving paths. These testimonies highlight the cost of neglecting silence and the freedom that comes from honoring it. Listening for the whisper also reorients our relationship with time. Instead of rushing to map the whole year with our own ideas, we learn to wait for guidance. Instead of demanding answers now, we allow the unfolding of wisdom over time. This posture transforms planning from a frantic act of control into a spiritual act of trust. For the listener, the invitation is simple yet profound. Carve out spaces where whispers can be heard. Turn down the noise, even for a few moments each day. Step outside. Breathe. Wait. Do not rush to fill silence with words or distractions. Let the quiet speak, because in the whisper, something remarkable happens. We begin to remember who we are and whose we are. And from that place, the year ahead starts to take shape with a clarity that rushing could never bring. The intentional year is not built on the roar of resolutions. It is built on the quiet strength of whispers, and only those willing to listen will hear the direction they most need. Once the noise has quieted and the whisper begins to stir, the next challenge comes into focus: naming what truly matters. For many of us, this is harder than it seems. We drift through weeks and months pulled by obligations, saying yes to things out of habit, and letting urgency dictate our days. But beneath the surface, a different question waits. What is worth giving my life to this year? The Packiams describe this moment as both clarifying and unsettling. Clarifying, because when you name what matters, life sharpens. Unsettling, because it forces you to confront the gap between your values and your choices. They remind us that clarity always requires courage. Imagine you are standing in a cluttered room, filled wall to wall with furniture, boxes, and objects collected over years. You can hardly move without bumping into something. This is how most of our lives feel: overstuffed, crowded, unfocused. To move freely, you must decide what stays, what goes. Naming what matters is the act of clearing space in your soul. For the Packiams, the process begins with asking simple but piercing questions. Who are the people I want to give my best energy to this year? What practices will nourish my soul? Which responsibilities align with my deepest callings, and which are simply noise? These questions become anchors in the storm of busyness. They speak openly about their own wrestlings, about the temptation to fill schedules with good but draining commitments, about how easy it is to sacrifice presence with family on the altar of productivity. Naming what matters forced them to say aloud what their hearts already knew. Relationships, faith, health, and meaningful work were central. Everything else had to orbit around those priorities, not the other way around. It's a countercultural move. Our culture teaches us to chase everything at once, to collect achievements, experiences, and accolades as if life were a trophy shelf. But the Packiams argue that fullness doesn't come from more. It comes from focus. When we name what matters, we stop scattering our energy across dozens of pursuits and instead pour deeply into what gives life. This naming process can be painful. To say this matters is to admit that does not. And letting go of secondary things often feels like loss. Yet the Packiams assure us that pruning is not punishment. It is the path to fruitfulness. Just as a vine grows stronger when trimmed, so our lives flourish when cut back to essentials. Naming what matters also reshapes how we view success. Instead of asking, "How much did I achieve?" we ask, "Was I faithful to what I said mattered most?" This subtle shift changes the tone of a whole year. Success becomes less about the volume of tasks and more about alignment with values. For listeners, the invitation is both simple and weighty. Take time to write down the few things that matter most. Not a list of 50 goals, but a handful of priorities so important that you would build your rhythms around them. Perhaps it's nurturing your marriage, being present with your children, cultivating rest, protecting health, or deepening your spiritual life. Whatever they are, naming them out loud gives them power. The Packiams remind us that unspoken values rarely shape us. We may say family matters, but if we never name it and structure time around it, other demands will always win. Only when values are named clearly can they begin to guide choices. And once they are named, something beautiful happens. Peace enters. The noise of comparison quiets. The pressure to do everything fades. Life begins to align. Not perfectly, but intentionally. This is the heart of the third movement of the intentional year. The courage to say, This is what I will give myself to. This is what matters most. And in naming it, you take the first true step toward living it. After naming what matters most, the question arises, how do we live it out without collapsing under pressure? The Packiams point us to a vital shift, choosing rhythms over resolutions. Resolutions are fragile. They are fueled by willpower, often drafted in a burst of January enthusiasm, and abandoned once reality presses in. A resolution says, I will do this perfectly, starting now. But life is rarely perfect, and when we stumble, shame arrives quickly. The Packiams suggest a different way. Instead of rigid resolutions, cultivate rhythms. Rhythms are sustainable. They breathe. They move with the flow of life, flexible yet consistent. Think of waves on a shore. They are steady, dependable, not identical each time, but always returning. In the same way, rhythms provide structure without strangling us with perfectionism. The Packiams share how this shift transformed their year. At one point, they felt trapped in cycles of failed resolutions, promises to eat healthier, to be more present, to pray more regularly, that collapsed within weeks. Discouragement followed, along with the sense that perhaps lasting change was impossible. But when they reframed these hopes as rhythms, everything softened. Instead of saying, I will never miss a workout, the rhythm became, movement is part of my week. Instead of, I will pray every day without fail, the rhythm became, I will return to prayer as often as I can, like a melody that keeps playing. Rhythms remove the weight of all or nothing thinking. Miss a day, and the rhythm calls you back without shame. Fall behind, and the pattern still waits. This is how grace enters our schedules, not as permission to drift, but as a reminder that consistency is more important than perfection. The Packiams also remind us that rhythms align with creation itself. The world is built on patterns, day and night, work and rest, seed time and harvest. We are not designed for relentless forward motion. We are designed for cycles. Resolutions ignore this truth, demanding constant upward progress. Rhythms honor it, inviting us into a life that pulses with balance. For example, instead of forcing productivity every day, we can structure weeks to include true rest. Instead of demanding constant intimacy in relationships, we can lean into rituals, family dinners, evening walks, weekly conversations, that anchor connection. Instead of expecting spiritual life to be dramatic, we can find it in simple practices, lighting a candle at prayer, reading a psalm, pausing in gratitude. This way of living is gentler, but it is not weaker. Rhythms cultivate strength over time. Like the slow growth of a tree, they may not seem impressive in the moment, but they produce deep roots. For listeners, the challenge is to consider, what rhythms would carry the values you named in the last step? If family matters, what weekly or daily pattern can nurture presence? If health matters, what steady practices, not crash diets or extreme plans, can honor your body? If faith matters, what simple rhythms can return you to God again and again? The Packiams emphasize that rhythms do not have to be grand. Small actions, repeated over time, shape who we become. A quiet walk, a weekly meal with friends, a consistent bedtime. These are not glamorous, but they anchor peace. By replacing resolutions with rhythms, the intentional year becomes not a sprint toward perfection, but a steady journey toward faithfulness. Each rhythm is like a stone in a pathway, guiding you forward step by step. And in that steady walking, freedom appears. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from the crushing weight of impossible expectations. The year no longer hangs on whether you flawlessly executed your goals. It rests on whether you lived within rhythms that gave life. This is the beauty of rhythms. They transform time from an enemy into a companion. They remind us that growth is not about one perfect moment, but about returning again and again to what matters most. When resolutions soften into rhythms, something deeper is revealed. Time itself is not the enemy. Time is sacred ground. How we treat it determines whether we live frantically or freely. The Packiams insist that before we can live intentionally, we must reframe our relationship with time. Most of us think of time as a tyrant. We say it slips through our fingers or runs out. We feel its pressure every morning when alarms jolt us awake, every evening when unfinished tasks glare back from our lists. Time feels scarce, something we fight against. But the Packiams urge us to see time differently, not as a prison, but as a gift. Imagine holding an hourglass in your hands. Sand trickles steadily, neither rushing nor pausing. Each grain is a moment, unique, unrepeatable, precious. We cannot hold the grains forever, but we can honor them as they fall. To treat time as sacred is to acknowledge its finiteness and to live each hour with reverence, not resentment. The Packiams root this vision in the rhythms of creation itself. From the beginning, time was blessed. Days and nights marked, seasons named, cycles given. Work was woven into the fabric of life, but so was rest. When we ignore these patterns, treating time only as fuel for productivity, we miss its sacredness. They speak candidly about seasons when they abuse time, cramming schedules with so many commitments that every day blurred. Exhaustion followed. Even the most meaningful work lost its joy when time was treated as nothing but a commodity. The breakthrough came when they began to order their days around sacred practices. Prayer at dawn, Sabbath once a week, intentional pauses between seasons of ministry. Time became not an enemy, but a canvas for peace. This perspective reshapes everything. If time is sacred, then mornings are not just hours to rush through. They are thresholds to step into with care. Meals are not interruptions in a workday. They are holy pauses for nourishment and connection. Even endings, of projects, of seasons, of years, are not failures, but natural closures in the rhythm of life. For listeners, the challenge is simple but profound. What would it mean to treat your hours as holy? To see each morning as an offering? To honor not only your busiest moments, but also your quietest? The Packiams remind us that when we treat time as sacred, even the ordinary becomes radiant. A commute turns into space for reflection. A chore becomes an act of love. An evening walk becomes prayer. The sacredness of time also calls us to balance. Work has its place, but so does rest. Effort matters, but so does play. Without this balance, life tilts into frenzy. With it, life regains harmony. The Packiams write that living intentionally does not mean doing more. It means doing what is fitting for each moment, honoring the gift of time instead of crushing it. Picture a symphony. Every note matters, but silence between notes matters too. Without rests, the music collapses into chaos. So it is with time. Sacred living honors both the sound and the silence, both the labor and the pause. And perhaps that is the greatest shift of all, to no longer see time as something to manage, but as something to cherish. When you see your days as holy, you stop asking, "How can I squeeze more in?" and start asking, "How can I walk more faithfully with what is given?" This reframing does not erase responsibility or deadlines, but it transforms them. A task becomes not a burden, but a way to steward the hour well. A deadline becomes not a threat, but a reminder that time is real and precious. In honoring time, you honor life itself. This is the heartbeat of an intentional year. Not to conquer time, but to walk with it as a sacred companion, trusting that each grain of sand carries meaning. If time is sacred ground, then one of its holiest patterns is Sabbath. The Packiams linger here, because Sabbath is more than a day off. It is the heartbeat of an intentional life. It is the rhythm that teaches us how to stop. Stopping does not come naturally. We live in a culture where worth is measured by output, where rest feels like laziness, where the question, "What did you do today?" implies that doing is more important than being. Yet Sabbath confronts this lie. It whispers a different truth. You are not valued because of your production, but because of your presence. The Packiams share how difficult Sabbath was for them at first. With young children, ministry responsibilities, and endless to-do lists, the idea of taking a full day to rest felt impossible, even irresponsible. There was always something urgent: emails unanswered, meals to prepare, projects waiting. But in their weariness, they began to see that Sabbath was not optional. It was survival. It was God's gift, not God's demand. Imagine standing in a field after harvest. The earth is bare, quiet, breathing. Nothing is produced, yet everything is being restored beneath the soil. That is the image of Sabbath. It is not wasted time, but fertile time, where renewal begins invisibly. The Packiams learned to shape Sabbath with simple practices. No work emails, no rushing from task to task, no frantic schedule. Instead, they turned to activities that gave life: meals shared slowly, walks together, unhurried prayers, laughter with children. Sabbath became less about rules and more about rhythm, less about what was forbidden and more about what restored joy. They discovered something surprising. Stopping actually multiplied their strength. What they once tried to accomplish in 7 frantic days could be done more peacefully in 6 when one was set apart. Rest became resistance against exhaustion. It became trust in action, the trust that life does not collapse when we stop, because it was never held up by our efforts alone. Sabbath also became a mirror. In stopping, the Packiams could see where their lives were out of balance. Rest revealed the places they were running too hard, the relationships they had neglected, the corners of the soul that needed healing. This is part of the gift of Sabbath. It not only restores, it reveals. For listeners, the invitation is to imagine what a Sabbath might look like in your own life. Not a rigid set of rules, but a sacred pause. Perhaps it means silencing notifications for a day, or choosing a meal where no one rushes away, or simply refusing to let work invade every hour. The form may vary, but the essence is the same. Stop, and remember you are more than your work. The Packiams remind us that Sabbath is not about perfection. Some weeks their practice faltered. Some days felt more chaotic than restful. But they kept returning, like a melody always waiting to be sung. Over time, Sabbath became an anchor, holding their family steady amid the storms of busyness. To live an intentional year without Sabbath is like trying to breathe without exhaling. It leaves us suffocated. But with Sabbath, breath returns, joy returns, presence returns, and perhaps most importantly, Sabbath teaches us that life is not earned, it is received. In stopping, we learn again that the world keeps turning without our effort, that we are sustained not by striving, but by grace. This is the quiet revolution of Sabbath. It frees us from endless hustle and leads us back to peace, leads us back to peace, leads us back to peace, leads us back to peace. When Sabbath restores our souls, we begin to see more clearly that life is not lived in isolation. The Packiams turn our attention next to relationships, the people who anchor us. Because no matter how carefully we craft rhythms or honor time, an intentional year cannot be built alone. We are shaped in community. Family, friends, mentors, even neighbors, all become mirrors and anchors. They reflect back who we are and keep us steady when we drift. But the Packiams remind us, relationships do not thrive by accident. They require intentional rhythms just as much as work or rest. They tell of seasons when ministry and ambition pulled them away from one another. Nights spent in meetings, weekends swallowed by obligations, children tugging at their sleeves while exhaustion dulled their patience. Slowly, they realized their calendars were filled with commitments, but empty of connection. It wasn't that they didn't love each other or their children. It was that love had been assumed, not nurtured. This realization reshaped everything. They began to schedule not only tasks, but togetherness. Weekly family dinners became non-negotiable. Evenings were reclaimed for laughter instead of emails. Vacations, however modest, were set aside as times to renew bonds. These small rituals became lifelines, reminding them that relationships cannot be left to chance. Think of a ship at sea. Without anchors, it drifts, no matter how strong its sails. Relationships are our anchors. They hold us steady when storms hit. They remind us of what matters when ambition blinds us. And they give us the courage to keep going when we want to quit. But intentional relationships are not only about family. The Packiams also highlight friendships. In a culture that glorifies independence, deep friendships are often neglected. Yet friendships provide spaces where we can be fully ourselves, without titles or performance. They remind us that we are more than our roles. For the Packiams, friendships became sacred rhythms. Gatherings with trusted friends, conversations over coffee, shared prayers in moments of uncertainty. These rhythms were not extravagant, but they were deliberate. And in them, they found resilience. The Packiams also speak of mentors and guides, people further along in life who offered wisdom, perspective, and encouragement. Without these voices, they admit, they would have stumbled more. Intentional living is not just about who walks beside us, but also about who walks ahead of us, lighting the way. For listeners, the invitation is to take inventory. Who are your anchors? Which relationships need more attention? Which ones need healing? Who speaks truth into your life, and who drains you away from what matters most? Living intentionally means not only naming what matters, but investing in the people who embody those values. The Packiams remind us that this is not easy. Relationships bring conflict, disappointment, and messiness. But avoiding them only leads to isolation, and isolation always withers the soul. The hard work of forgiveness, honesty, and presence is the soil where lasting bonds grow. And here lies the beauty. When relationships are nurtured, they create a ripple effect. A peaceful home spills peace into work. A friendship built on trust strengthens courage in the wider world. A marriage nurtured by time overflows into the lives of children. Intentional relationships multiply life far beyond what we imagine. At the heart of this is love expressed not in grand gestures, but in rhythms, showing up consistently, speaking with kindness, making space for laughter, listening deeply. These are the anchors that keep us grounded when the currents of life threaten to pull us away. To live an intentional year is to resist the illusion of self-sufficiency. It is to admit, I need others, and they need me. And in that mutual dependence, we discover the deepest kind of freedom, the freedom to be fully human, fully connected, fully alive. With relationships anchoring us, the Packiams shift focus to another arena that demands intention: our work. Because work, whether in an office, a classroom, a studio, or a home, can either be an endless treadmill of frenzy or a steady stream of purpose. The difference lies in how we approach it. Too often we treat work as the place where worth must be proven. We hustle, pile task on task, chase achievements, and measure ourselves by output. The result is exhaustion, even when we succeed. The Packiams confess they lived like this for years, saying yes to every opportunity, filling every spare moment with ministry and projects, and confusing busyness with faithfulness. The turning point came when they realized their work had lost its center. It was no longer about serving with joy, but about surviving the pace. They began asking a new question. How do we work with purpose, not frenzy? Purposeful work begins with identity. When you know who you are, You no longer need to prove it with constant motion. You can let your work flow from calling, not compulsion. For the Packiams, this meant grounding themselves in faith, that their worth was already secure. From this posture, work became expression, not desperation. They began to reframe daily tasks through this lens. Teaching a class wasn't just an obligation, it was shaping lives. Preparing a meal wasn't drudgery, it was an act of love. Writing, speaking, parenting, all became channels for purpose. The work itself didn't change, but the way they carried it did. They also learned the necessity of boundaries. Frenzy thrives when work invades every corner of life. Purpose thrives when work is given its rightful place. For them, this meant setting start and end times, refusing to let email bleed into every evening, and recognizing that saying no to extra projects was not failure, but faithfulness. Think of a fire. When contained in a hearth, it warms and nourishes. When uncontained, it burns everything in its path. Work is like that. With boundaries, it gives life. Without them, it consumes us. The Packiams also speak of aligning work with seasons. There are times of planting, hard labor, long hours, full investment, and there are times of harvest, moments to celebrate, rest, and enjoy the fruit. Frenzy ignores seasons, demanding constant output. Purpose honors the natural ebb and flow. For listeners, the challenge is to examine your relationship with work. Do you see it as a treadmill, demanding endless motion? Or as a calling, an opportunity to bring something good into the world? The difference may not lie in the job itself, but in the posture of the heart and the boundaries you set. The Packiams remind us that purpose doesn't mean every day feels glamorous. Some work will always be hard, repetitive, or unnoticed. But when carried intentionally, even the most ordinary task can become meaningful. Folding laundry becomes care. Sending emails becomes service. Driving children to school becomes participation in their growth. This reorientation frees us. No longer enslaved to the lie that more is always better, we can choose to work faithfully, then rest without guilt. Work becomes one part of a balanced rhythm, not the dictator of every hour. And in this balance, we rediscover joy. The Packiams describe moments of finishing a day's work with satisfaction, not because everything was perfect, but because it was purposeful. They could step away and say, "It was enough." That phrase, enough, became the antidote to frenzy. To live an intentional year is to honor work, but not worship it. To give it weight, but not dominance. To see it not as a measure of worth, but as a gift we offer. In this shift, we find peace, not from abandoning work, but from reclaiming it as purposeful and free. Once work is reframed with purpose, another challenge emerges: learning the courage to say no. The Packiams remind us that intention is not only about choosing what to embrace, it is equally about refusing what does not belong. Without the strength to decline, even the best priorities are swallowed by noise. Saying no is uncomfortable. Many of us fear disappointing others, missing opportunities, or being perceived as unhelpful. So we overcommit. We attend gatherings that drain us, volunteer for tasks that don't align with our gifts, accept projects that push us past exhaustion. Slowly, our lives become crowded with obligations we never consciously chose. The Packiams confess they struggled here. Invitations came constantly. Another speaking event, another meeting, another chance to serve. All of them seemed good, but each yes pulled them further from the values they had named. Their family felt the strain, their health began to suffer, and the very work they were called to do lost clarity. It was only when they began practicing no that they found freedom. Saying no is not rejection, it is stewardship. It is the recognition that time and energy are limited, and that to protect what matters, boundaries must be drawn. Think of a garden again. To flourish, weeds must be pulled. Not every plant, even if beautiful, belongs in the same soil. In the same way, not every opportunity belongs in your year. The Packiams learned to filter commitments through a simple question. Does this align with what matters most? If not, the answer became no, even if it was difficult. They discovered that each no was actually a deeper yes, to rest, to family, to health, to peace. This practice of pruning extended beyond schedules. They examined habits, distractions, and even relationships. Social media scrolling, endless entertainment, and comparison all cluttered their attention. By cutting back, they discovered a sharper focus and greater presence. For listeners, the challenge is to see no not as loss, but as liberation. What would change if you believed that every no created space for something truer? That saying no to one demand could mean saying yes to your children, to your soul, to God's quiet leading. Of course, no is rarely easy. It may bring misunderstanding. Others may question or resist. But the Packiams insist that without this courage, intentional living is impossible. The alternative is a year dictated by everyone else's priorities, leaving you scattered and weary. Think of a sculptor chipping away at marble. The beauty of the statue emerges not from adding more, but from removing what does not belong. So it is with our lives. Each no is a chisel strike, revealing the shape of what truly matters. The Packiams discovered that saying no also deepened relationships. Instead of showing up everywhere thinly stretched, they could be fully present where they chose to be. Instead of offering fragments of attention to many, they could offer wholeness to a few. This presence became more valuable than the endless scattering of yeses. In the end, the courage to say no is an act of faith. It is trusting that you do not need to do everything to live fully. It is believing that peace and purpose come not from addition, but from subtraction. And in that subtraction, life becomes lighter, clearer, freer. The noise fades. What matters stands out. And the year ahead begins to feel less like a frantic scramble and more like a purposeful journey. When we begin to prune back and say no, what emerges is space. Space to notice that life itself moves in seasons. The Packiams invite us to embrace this truth. Every year, every soul, every journey carries cycles of renewal. An intentional life does not fight these seasons but learns to live within them. Our culture glorifies constancy. It tells us to always be productive, always moving upward, always chasing growth. But creation itself speaks differently. Winter makes way for spring. Summer ripens into autumn. The ground rests before it blooms again. To ignore these patterns is to live against the grain of life itself. The Packiams confess that they once resisted seasons. They tried to maintain unbroken momentum, never slowing down, always pushing forward. But the result was burnout. It was only when they began to honor seasons that they discovered a new kind of strength. They described seasons of abundance, times when energy was high, opportunities overflowed, and everything seemed to flourish. In these times, the challenge was not to squander abundance, but to steward it wisely. They also speak of seasons of scarcity, times of illness, disappointment, or limitation, where the invitation was not to despair, but to trust that renewal would come. And they remind us of seasons of transition, those in-between spaces where old rhythms no longer fit and new ones have not yet taken hold. Each season carries lessons if we are willing to listen. For the listener, this is a call to discern. What season am I in right now? Am I in a season of planting, pouring effort into unseen soil? Am I in a season of harvest, enjoying the fruit of past labor? Am I in a season of rest, where the soul needs quiet more than activity? Or am I in a season of pruning, letting go of what no longer fits? Naming the season frees us from the unrealistic demand to be everything all at once. The Packiams share how they began to mark these transitions intentionally. At the start of each year, they ask God for clarity on the season ahead. Was this a year of deepening roots or a year of new ventures? Was it a year to expand or a year to simplify? These discernments shaped their choices and gave peace when circumstances shifted. Think of a farmer working the land. They do not demand fruit in winter. They do not despair when fields lie bare. They trust the cycle, knowing that each season has its role. In the same way, intentional living means refusing to panic when growth pauses, or when losses come, or when change unsettles us. Seasons are not obstacles. They are the rhythm of renewal. This perspective also frees us from comparison. Your season may be one of quiet, while another person's season is one of abundance. Envy fades when you realize you are not meant to mirror their cycle, but to live faithfully within your own. The Packiams remind us that seasons often end before we are ready. Children grow, jobs change, friendships shift, health falters. But endings are not failures. They are invitations into the next chapter. By embracing them, we find resilience instead of regret. For listeners, the practice is simple yet transformative. Take time to notice the season of your soul. Journal it. Pray it. Name it out loud. Then live accordingly. Push forward when it is time to plant. Celebrate when it is time to harvest. Rest when it is time to pause. Release when it is time to let go. The intentional year is not about controlling the cycle but walking faithfully through it. And when we do, we discover a surprising truth. Every season, even the hardest, carries seeds of renewal waiting to bloom in time. After embracing the rhythm of seasons, the Packiams lead us to a deeper truth. An intentional life is not meant to be lived from emptiness, but from overflow. Too often we operate from scarcity, draining ourselves dry, giving until there is nothing left, measuring worth by how much we pour out. But the invitation here is radical: to live filled, so that what spills over is joy, not exhaustion. Living from overflow begins with the recognition that we cannot give what we do not have. A parent who never rests cannot truly offer presence. A leader who never pauses cannot truly guide with wisdom. A friend who never replenishes cannot truly give compassion. Overflow happens only when we allow ourselves to be filled first. The Packiams share candidly how they once lived at the edge of depletion. Their days were full of ministry, parenting, and commitments, yet beneath the surface they were running on fumes. Small irritations turned into anger, joy disappeared, and even meaningful work felt like drudgery. It was only when they began to prioritize renewal, through prayer, rest, healthy practices, that they discovered a new way of living. Instead of scraping by, they began to live from a deep well. Imagine a fountain. When its source runs strong, water rises and spills effortlessly over the edges, refreshing everything around it. But when the source is neglected, the fountain dries, leaving only cracks. Our lives are no different. The source must be tended if we want to overflow with life. This overflow is not indulgence. It is not about hoarding rest or retreating from responsibility. It is about cultivating rhythms that keep the inner life alive, so that generosity, creativity, and love come naturally. The Packiams remind us that true peace is not something we manufacture. It is something we carry because we have been filled. For listeners, the question is simple: what fills you? Is it prayer, solitude, time in nature, music, deep conversation, laughter with loved ones? The Packiams encourage us to identify these sources and protect them fiercely, because they are not luxuries. They are lifelines. They also emphasize that overflow is not about perfection. There will be weeks when exhaustion returns, when the well feels low, when joy feels far. The point is not to live endlessly full, but to continually return to the source. Each return is a reminder that peace is not earned through striving, but received through presence. Living from overflow changes how we engage the world. Instead of clinging to opportunities out of fear, we can give freely. Instead of snapping under pressure, we can respond with patience. Instead of being defined by scarcity, we can embody abundance. This shift ripples outward, transforming homes, workplaces, and communities. Think of a candle lighting another. The flame does not diminish by being shared, it multiplies. So it is with overflow. The more we live replenished, the more others are touched by the light we carry. The Packiams testify that once they began living from overflow, their family atmosphere changed. Their children noticed the difference. Parents who were present, not distracted. Their marriage found more laughter, less strain. Their ministry flowed with greater authenticity. Nothing outside them had changed drastically, but everything inside had been renewed. The intentional year is not about squeezing more into empty schedules. It is about filling the soul so fully that life flows outward with ease. It is about trusting that peace is not a prize at the end of striving, but a posture available now, in the present moment, when we choose to be filled. This is the gift of overflow. It turns life from survival into abundance, from scarcity into freedom, from mere existence into joy. All the rhythms of listening, naming, pruning, resting, and overflowing lead to this final threshold, crossing into the new year. The Packiams describe it as more than a calendar change. It is a sacred passage, a doorway into a future that can be walked with clarity and peace instead of chaos and drift. Most of us stumble into New Year's with a sense of déjà vu. We carry over the same unfinished resolutions, the same regrets, the same half-hearted promises. The Packiams suggest a different crossing, one marked by intention. They encourage pausing at the border of years, just as travelers pause at a gate, to acknowledge what has been and to envision what is to come. This crossing begins with gratitude. Looking back, we name the gifts of the past year, the relationships that sustained us, the moments of joy, even the lessons learned in hardship. Gratitude softens regret and reframes our story. Then comes release, acknowledging what must be left behind, old habits, lingering bitterness, commitments that no longer fit. Without release, we drag unnecessary weight into the year ahead. Finally, comes vision. The Packiams invite us to imagine the kind of people we want to become, not just the tasks we want to complete. What does peace look like in your daily rhythms? What does freedom look like in your relationships? What does purpose feel like in your work? This vision is not about rigid control of the future, but about walking forward with a compass instead of wandering aimlessly. Crossing into a new year with intention also means carrying forward the rhythms already planted. Sabbath remains a sacred anchor. Relationships remain central. Seasons are honored. Boundaries are protected. Work flows from purpose. Instead of starting over each January, life becomes a steady unfolding of the same guiding truths. Imagine standing at a riverbank as the old year flows away. The water carries both your triumphs and your failures downstream. On the other side, a new current beckons. You step into it, not with frantic strokes, but with steady breath, trusting the rhythms you have chosen to carry you forward. This is what it means to cross intentionally. For the Packiams, this yearly threshold became a ritual. Together they reflected on the past year, celebrated moments of joy, confessed moments of drift, and prayed for wisdom in the days ahead. This ritual did not erase uncertainty. Life always carried unknowns, but it gave them footing. It allowed them to enter each new year not as wanderers, but as pilgrims with direction. For listeners, the invitation is to adopt your own ritual of crossing. Perhaps it is a walk on the last day of the year, naming aloud what you are leaving behind. Perhaps it is a journal entry, where gratitude and grief are written side by side. Perhaps it is a shared meal with loved ones, speaking hopes for the year ahead. Whatever the form, the heart is the same. Do not rush the crossing. Mark it with intention. And so the intentional year is not just an idea, but a way of life. It is a choice to begin slowly, to listen deeply, to name clearly, to live rhythmically, to rest boldly, to prune courageously, to work purposefully, to love intentionally, and to cross each threshold with peace. As the Packiams close their invitation, the vision they offer is simple. A year not dominated by frenzy or fear, but guided by freedom, peace, and purpose. A year that is lived, not wasted. A year that reflects not perfection, but presence. And now, as you step from this story into your own year, the question echoes. What will you carry forward? What will you release? And how will you walk into the days ahead? With drift or with intention? The choice is yours. The choice is yours. The choice is yours. The choice is yours.